This week on A to Z Running, have you ever searched the internet for running advice? We kick off a new series where we search common running topics and react to the search engine's top suggestions.
In the world of running, world records and fast running are all but guaranteed in Valencia, and this half marathon fell right in line.
The question around doping allegations continues to grow, and we will help you make sense of it all.
And in case you weren't aware, there's a world record for running a marathon in high heels. Ouch! And a man tried to break it in Chicago.
All this and more on A to Z Running.
Welcome back to A to Z Running, where we help runners thrive with information, inspiration, and coaching services. I'm Andy.
And I'm Zach, and you can learn about our services at AtoZRunning.com and follow us in the places we post content, Instagram, Spotify, and YouTube. And by the way, we post our podcast like all over the place. So any of those podcast apps and platforms, if you're feeling like, I don't like my current podcast app anymore, I want a different one, we're going to be there too, so you'll find us.
Including Amazon Music, which is where I've been listening to podcasts lately.
Are you trying to give Amazon a plug?
No, I'm just saying that is a place that not all podcasts are. You have to do a separate RSS for that.
No, not if you use a service that posts it there for you.
No, I think we had to add that.
No.
No? Okay. I'm wrong about
But
things. He's the tech guy. I just along for the conversation.
Not at all. But you can find us in a lot of places. And so why not listen to us more than once? Just listen to us on every single podcast
That would
platform.
be excessive. That would be too much.
Really, though. Do you get all the information one time through with any kind of content? No. You got to go over and over and over. So
Okay. You're belaboring. Okay.
All right.
So, Zach, how do you feel a week after a marathon?
All right. So we mentioned last week, I ran the Chicago. Nope, it wasn't Chicago. I ran
What did you do?
a marathon somewhere. I did something. I'm sure of it. Clearly, I'm feeling great, and I feel pretty good. So my post-marathon experience is somewhat atypical, I guess you could say, because the first thing that I want to do after I run a marathon is run really fast on a track. Like we did all this marathon stuff. Now I want to go on a track and run fast.
That's not always the case, so I'm going to hedge it.
Oh, yeah.
There are times that Zach has not wanted to run steps for months.
Well, that was
But
before I
sometimes-
figured out how to do the marathon thing a little bit better.
Okay, yeah. Well, he's stacking season on season, so you're becoming stronger and
Yeah.
all the things.
And just not overdo it. If you really overdo it in a marathon and you're overcooked, you're going to need a lot of time afterward. And for many runners, most I would wager, and myself included, in those instances, you probably hate running for at least some period of time. And that has happened. It doesn't happen normally.
Not lately.
That's not the
Definitely
most
not
common
lately.
result. Yeah.
For you.
So anyway, I like to, after a marathon, I like to just kind of take a few days, nice and easy. I'll do a little bit of walking, but I generally am not going to try to do any running for a couple of days, and just see how everything's feeling. You never really know until about 2 days after a marathon if you've like hurt something. It tends to not. There's a whole lot of noise for a couple of days after the marathon where just like everything feels bad, and then after that, most everything starts to feel better, and then you might find an acute instance of something that doesn't start feeling better, and then you realize, oh, I think I actually injured something possibly. So you got to give it the time that it needs, and usually it's 2 or 3 days. But so I'll take 2 or 3 days off after a marathon, and then I try doing some light jogging after that just to kind of see what my body can handle and how it's responding to things. And it's usually about between days like 3 to 7 after the marathon that I'll just do a little bit of jogging, 30 minutes, 60 minutes, sometimes as much as 90 minutes if I'm really bouncing back quickly. But just depends on what the body can handle and feels good doing. I'm not just like pushing the limit or something. I want to feel good, and I do a little bit of jogging.
This also is not our recommendation for people because everybody is different. So I would say typically it's more like a couple weeks before people are feeling like they want to run again. So it just depends on where you're at. So I would, and also this is another consideration, the more well-trained you were in preparation for your marathon, the more quickly you'll recover after.
And the better your execution of the race itself. So if you were barely able to stay on your feet by the time you cross the finish line, you're going to need more time afterward. If you were able to execute in such a way so that you didn't totally overexpend everything earlier on. But also there's many other layers to that. How well did you fuel and hydrate during the race? How well did you fuel and hydrate immediately after the race? This is why we were talking about post-race stuff last week on the podcast. If you didn't catch it, make sure you go back and listen. But all those things contribute to whether or not you recover immediately or quickly. There's really no true immediate recovery after a marathon because it is just a serious amount of expenditure that goes on in that kind of an experience. But as it were, back to the point. I did start jogging 3 or 4 days after the race and felt pretty good. It always takes several days of just light jogging before your legs start to then again feel regular while you're running. Before that, it's like I feel like I'm not the same person I was 7 days ago. But eventually you start to feel regular. And then once I started feeling regular, then it's just a question of what can I handle within reason? And so I, in this instance, 7 days after the race, was able to try a little bit of like picking it up a little bit to try to see if my legs are coming back enough.
Again, not normal. That's not normal.
No, not necessarily. And so all of this is with the anticipation of, depending on how I'm coming back, I'm going to start scheduling some races, because what I like to do after marathon, as I mentioned, is I do like to try to have a period of time where I'm focused on short and fast running. One, because I think it actually overall helps with my general development as a runner. I think that's true for everybody. Diversity in training and variety is a good thing. But also, I really like running short and fast races. That's probably, well, I can't say I enjoy one or the other more, because I like all of it. I like running marathons. I like racing a mile. And I don't want to not do any of it. And so I take about 6 to 8 weeks after a marathon to do what would be considered a kind of like miniature training season focused on fast stuff. And it usually goes fairly well. It's fun, and sometimes it's been successful, and sometimes it's just been mediocre for what I have done in the past, and that's fine either way. So this time I felt pretty good. 7 days after the race, I've been able to do a little bit of some faster running, and I'm not quite there yet. I can tell that my body is still taking longer to recover from even like an easy, like a 90-minute run than normal. And I also didn't get a ton of sleep last night, and that might be part of why my run didn't feel as good as I would have expected today. But as it were, I am planning now some races, and for this kind of a thing, it's not like, 8 weeks of training and then run a race. It's race as often as possible, because what we do with these kinds of things, the short and the fast running training, is we include a lot of race type efforts in the training. And you can do them on your own, or you can do them by signing up for a race and actually going out and doing it in a race. And I like to do the latter. So
that's why this set up for many track athletes, not just because they're making more money the more races that they do, but they have a season of racing that they're fine tuning as they go too, because a lot of times for these faster races, there is some element of trial and error. Mm-hmm. So it's really good. That helps grow intuition into an even greater degree when you're giving such a high effort.
Yeah. So I do have one race coming down the pike that is an indoor track race that I hope to be able to do, because of the nature of this type of a thing. There's no guarantee that I actually could even get into it, but hope to be able to do it. And that would be a kind of like the pinnacle of this miniature season. But as Andy said, lots of racing up to that point, and not necessarily that all the other races are like less important.
Which is kind of hard to find, though, in Michigan in the winter.
By lots of racing, it probably is going to be 2. Yeah. It's not winter. Not yet.
No, but it will be by time. Like, you're going to start racing probably in November, and then...
Like next week.
Are you? Are you racing next week?
If I can find one, that's the point.
All right.
If I can find them. So, yes, this all amounts to, if you recall from Lydiard's writing way back in the day, he actually used to have his 800-meter and miler types of guys do what they called at the time the marathon conditioning, which now is just called conditioning, because people get scared when they say marathon conditioning and they say, but I'm only running a 5K. And he says, okay, I'll just call it regular conditioning, and then have them do the same thing. But his 800-meter star, for instance, Peter Snell, would do that, and at the end of the conditioning block, they would all run a marathon. They would all go out and run a marathon race, just because.
Again,
why not?
Not recommended.
And at the same time, they would do so in a manner of like the old story, which is funny. They get to like 22 miles in, and Peter Snell just sits down, and someone's like, "What's up?" And he's like, "I'm done. That's enough. I'm not doing anymore." So it's not like they like seriously went out and raced a hard marathon or something.
He's an intuitive runner. He knew when to be done.
I think he just didn't like running that
who
long.
knows? Who knows? Let's give him a little credit.
So then they would go on after that to 8 weeks of focused speed type of stuff. And Lydiard used to feel that was actually a very valuable, that combination was a valuable thing, even for the 800-meter runners.
We're not saying that that's what you should do, by the
No.
way. I keep trying to like bring this to reality.
You're like trying to hedge every single
No,
thing I say. I'm
in the-
talking about my own experience here.
I know. I
That's
just wanna make
why I started to implement, because I thought, okay, maybe, and I didn't do this on my own. I was talking to Barry McGee about it back when I was working with him. He was one of Lydiard's original marathoners, and he was one of the ones training. Actually, he's told part of that story about Peter Snell with the sitting down. Anyway, so Barry McGee was there, and he specifically told me, he's like, it's actually after a marathon season, it's a great time to do something else if you're able to recover and handle it. And he took it for granted, and I'm sure that's because he's had so much experience, and at the time at 88, 89 years old, he's seen it all, and by then it's like, of course you're going to be able to recover from the marathon, because you're going to do it. You're going to do what I'm telling you to do, and what I'm telling you to do is going to make it so you can recover. And like that was the way he was thinking about it. So his inspiration helped kind of engender in me a sense of just because I ran the marathon race at the end of the season doesn't mean that I now have to like hit a hard reset and not do anything for a while before I start running at bare minimum again. That's not necessarily what you have to do, depending on how you have prepared, how you have executed, and how you're recovering. Sometimes I have had to just call it quits and say I need 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Sometimes it was actually one instance, it was like 8 weeks off before I'm going to really be doing this running thing again. And that's because that's what was needed at the time. There's a lot going on there.
Yeah. And for me, there's not a ton going on. It says in their notes here, I'm supposed to give you an update, but there is not a lot to report. I guess I'm just still trying to work through the hamstring stuff. I am working on tension. I work with endurance rehabilitation and athletics. That's my PT. And Stephanie's been helping me tremendously with my back, and that's been helpful. And the hamstring stuff is still kind of like there, but as I mentioned, I think last week or 2 weeks ago, the scraping has really been helping, and also heat has helped. So I'm finding things that are helpful, and I'm still hopeful, but it's been a long journey, continued to be a long journey, and there has been progress. So that's what really is making me excited to continue to move forward with these recovery tools and techniques.
All right. So that's what we're doing. Now, let's take on the search engines.
As we teased, this week's topic is AtoZRunning versus the search engine. We're going to have a series, and it starts today. And the thing that we first searched on the internet was suggestions for couch to 5K. What was the exact search engine?
Well, before we get to that, let's
okay.
talk about what we're trying to do and why we're doing this. So, Andy said earlier, or I guess I probably said it, but she was the one who wrote it, that we search stuff as runners. When we feel like I need something, and I'm running a marathon for the first time, I don't know what to do, Google it, right? And that's just that's the thing that we do. And so it's either social media or search engines that tell us everything about what we tend to know about running. And I don't think that's altogether inherently bad by any stretch of the imagination, except for the social media part. That's literally altogether inherently bad. But if that is the way we tend to gain information, it's interesting to think about what is the information we're most likely to get when we search certain things. And we thought, how about we just tackle some of the big topics and just see what does the search engine tell us and how do we feel about that? We'll just react to it.
Yeah.
We may agree wholeheartedly and we may disagree wholeheartedly. and so that's just going to be the nature of it. And we don't know until we search it and find out what's there. And so this week, as Andy was alluding to, we wanted to start with a topic that is itself a kind of beginning. For a lot of runners, I'm thinking about the very first time I'm going to do this thing, and I have no idea what I'm doing. And so the phrase that tends to come to mind, the most common phrase, is couch to 5K. And so I'm just getting started. I want to search the best couch to 5K training. And that's literally what we searched. Best couch to 5K training.
And now we react. Well, no, first we tell you what it said,
First
and
we tell
then
you what
we
it says.
react.
Then we'll react. So it starts with, and this is depending on the search engine that you use, but almost always you get some kind of like summary of the topic. And so in Google in particular, you're going to get an AI summary, which is the AI basically just taking the top 5 articles, and usually just the top 1 actually, and just telling you what it says in slightly different words. It is the most strange concept to me that like somehow that's supposed to be revolutionary, but all it was just a slight paraphrase of the article that's right underneath it. But anyway, okay, so the AI is going to pretend to have a lot of information for you. And then it also has, and this is I find to be really interesting, is like associated questions. So questions related to the topic you searched, and then it gives you answers from the most common articles below. And that I think that's kind of helpful too. That becomes, as far as I have learned in any of the things I've tried to research about the topic of how people use search engines, people do 2 things with search engines. First, they only click on the first few things. They never go farther than the first page, and they almost never go farther than the first like 3 or 4 listed things.
That's why our website really hasn't taken off with our articles.
What do you mean? Our website is exploding.
I'm just saying.
Okay. So not really needing to be self-deprecating here, but if you're not in the first 3 or 4 things listed in a search engine, then no one's going to click on your stuff via search engines. Outside of the rare few people who are really trying to find information. So that is true, number 1. And then number 2, most people actually don't even click on any of the links. They just read the excerpt descriptions for each of them. And if that excerpt description doesn't give them the answer they want, instead of clicking the link, they just scroll to the next thing. And so what it becomes is we're really not actually mining information in a deep sense when we use search engines. We're looking for like the quick, simple stuff. However, that being the case, in general, we also believe that runners tend to behave a little differently with this kind of stuff because you're looking for information to help you figure something out most of the time. So you're likely to be the one to click on those drop downs and read the question responses, click on the link at the first or third posting, and we think that's going to be the case.
And we all come from a bias. Yeah. So like if I'm searching what I think is wrong with me, like a medical thing,
don't do that.
I'm going to click on the thing that's probably the worst thing first, because that's like, I'm like finding out what my fears are, and I'm like in a place of anxiety instead of looking or calling my doctor, which I should be doing instead. But I'm just saying, like, we all come from a bias too at what we're going to actually look at.
That is exactly the kind of persona that social media algorithms were designed to prey upon.
Yeah.
Is that exactly?
Absolutely. 100%.
Don't give them the fodder they seek. All right, so AI is the first thing on Google, and that's the first thing that we brought about. And AI had tips for beginners when you search the couch to 5K stuff. It says start with a run walk, increase your run, but keep the walk the same over time, vary intervals. So it's like just good basic tips. I think it's good tips.
Yeah.
It's
a little specific because he's actually giving you generalization. It like is more specific.
Yeah, like 1 minute each for the run walk.
And tells you what pace to run.
It gives you a recommended comfortable pace, 4 to 5 miles an hour. It uses miles per hour because it doesn't understand running because it's an AI. But anyway, that's what it tells you. And it became immediately apparent that these were all just summarizing the Runner's World article, in fact. So we'll come back to that. Nothing I found in the AI's information was not in the Runner's World article. So it just took Runner's World and said, here's what you should do. And I think somewhere it kind of credits Runner's World with it.
Oh.
But AIs are vicious when it comes to copyright.
Yeah,
so,
I'm not really sure.
Yeah.
But I should say, like, nothing about that was alarming, except for maybe being a little too specific.
Yeah, I mean, it's good. That's good advice.
Yeah.
Off to a good start on the search. Okay, next, we then went through, and those were also the same things that were in the question summaries. Like there's like a brief, here are some other questions, all the same information. So then we clicked on some of the articles and said, okay, what do the top few articles, because we are just like everyone else on a search engine. We don't go anywhere past the third or fourth thing on the list, and we certainly don't click to page 2. So maybe we should do that on some of these. That could be interesting. Like, what do you find when you get 3 pages into the search engine instead of... All right. Number 1, not surprisingly, Runner's World is going to be the first article. It's going to be the first article on a lot of running-related searches, and there's a simple reason why, and that is because Google has decided in their search engine to prioritize based on what they think is the most credible source for this information. And so, since Runner's World owns the industry on claiming to be credible, that's almost always going to show up first. And it's not because it's the most read article. It's not because it's the most trafficked thing or the most searched for thing. It's just because Google prioritizes it in that way. This is all public knowledge. They've announced that they've rejiggered the algorithm to do things like this. Okay. Runner's World article entitled "The Couch to 5K Training Plan for New Runners." Not surprising that would come up. Lots of information is one of the things I do appreciate about Runner's World. I don't often say those words in the same sentence, but they tend to give you lots of information. And that's great, because with stuff like this, more information is better. And this article had like 7 different sections that were all quite lengthy. So there's like a table of contents at the top where you can like skip to the section. Thought that was helpful too. So it included stuff like reminding you about the difference between kilometers and miles. How long is a 5K actually, if you don't know kilometers?
I think that was very smart of them to do, because I know that there are people who don't have that front of mind. If they are not traveling around or they're in the world of measuring for races or whatnot, it's just not in their head that K would be used.
Now, what they didn't do, which I thought was kind of strange, because as they were doing that, I thought it probably would make sense here for this brand new runner who's looking for information to get an idea of about how long it tends to take people to run a 5K.
Oh, yeah.
But they did not do that.
Okay.
Or at least not in that sense, or in that way.
But it could be, I mean, maybe that's a good thing, because you don't want to discourage people if the typical amount of time they exceed that.
Yeah, well, I can tell you, too, my tendency would be, if I were the one writing this article, is to have like a whole section on the history of 5Ks and like have a thing about like, here's the current world record for men, here's the current world record for women, and here's how it has been broken over time, and then here's what you can expect as like if it's a great high school runner, they do these kind of, I would do all that because it would just be really interesting to me.
There were some good sections though.
Yeah, some good information. So let's keep on. Runner's World continued. It gave you tips for how to find races somewhere in the article. It wasn't exactly in this order, but tips for how to find races, which I think is great, because while most people who decide I want to run a 5K usually have one in mind, usually it's like my friend is doing this race, I'm doing it too kind of thing. It is definitely the case that a lot of people are thinking, I need to do something to get active, and running a 5K is something everyone does, so that's what I'm going to do. And they might not have a clue what race to run.
Did they say in that section, though, to try to find a local small race? Because I think that it would be very difficult if it was your first ever 5K to go and try to park in a big city and have corrals and all of that. I think wouldn't you think that a tip?
5Ks aren't generally that enormous.
Well, it depends on where you are, what you're doing. That's what I'm saying. Like they should know probably the scale of the race that they're running, because that determines so many things.
Yeah, it could be. Yep. They didn't include that. No.
Okay. Well, I added my 2 cents.
There were things about like when you get to the race, here's some things to remember and some of that kind of stuff.
Okay.
Yeah. Tips for adjusting your plan depending on if you end up missing time. Like you miss 3 days, here's what you should do differently. If you miss a whole week, here's what you should do. And I think that's really valuable. It was kind of like generalized and vague. And so in that instance, I think more specific would have been better, just to be more helpful. But of course, what they're probably doing is trying to tease you just enough to get information that will be helpful, but not so much that you don't click the thing to like subscribe to Runner's World Plus and get additional resources.
Okay.
Like if you want to actually download one of their plans, you need to subscribe. And so you can't see the plan, but they can tell you all about it on the page. They have their 4 rules for new runners, which I kind of like. I kind of like these. I don't think these are for new runners. I think these rules are actually probably more in general for all runners, but they called them 4 rules for new runners. Curious how you feel about these, Andy, because Andy did not read these ahead of time. Rule number 1, seek repetition, not perfection. Oh, like consistency over time. I like it.
Yeah.
Rule number 2, something is better than nothing. So do it, even if you can't do it perfectly, which is basically rule number 1
Get
over
out the
again.
door. Yeah.
Restated. Rule number 3, bad days are part of the process, which is also basically rule number 1 restated, but we'll go with it because it's a little more precise. I like that. Yeah, as a rule, like expect that. However, they then went on to say a good rule of thumb is out of 10 runs, 5 are going to be average, 3 will be awful, and 2 will be great. And I saw that and I thought, what in the world are you doing with this? How would you know that? Like you just made up a statistic.
Yeah. I don't like that either. And the reason why I don't like rule number 3, I'll be honest, because bad days are part of the process. No, let's totally reframe that. I don't even like the idea of bad days, because a bad day is saying that work you did or the information that you gained wasn't valuable.
Remember our whole rant about bad days about a year ago?
And I'm feeling that right now, the rant inside of me, because that's not like what we want to teach new runners, is that there is, if you are running slower than you thought you would, or you have to modify things, you don't want them to pinhole that as a bad day. That's not a bad day. They're like, you listen to your body, you become more intuitive, you get the adaptations for the day, period, done, good day.
So the spirit of their rule was more in line with what Andy's describing. And so I can appreciate the intent behind the rule is like, don't worry about it if the day doesn't go like as well as you hope it would, right? You don't feel amazing every day.
True. The intent was
don't worry about it. However, you're right. And to say bad days, and then quantify it in the way that they do too, is like that doesn't make any sense. Don't do that.
And really though, like if you're having 2 awful days, like that's
no, it says 3 out of 10.
3 out of 10. I think you're
doing something wrong.
Yeah, I don't think you should. I mean, there's the week before my period that all of them probably feel bad, but in general in training, I feel like that 3 awful days would be telling me something about my training and what I need to that I need to do some introspection and figure out what's going on.
Are the runs the week before your period awful because physiologically you're in a bad state, or because emotionally you feel so badly about everything?
So the hormones are different, and then I'm more tired, and also it's like you don't actually adapt as well to work
I know.
the week before your period.
Yeah.
So
we should cover that more in depth.
I feel more
sometime
achy,
in the
more
podcast.
inflammation. I could go on and on, but I'm not going to.
Where are you at right now? Are you feeling this way right now? No, never mind. Okay, so rule number 4, then the last one is when in doubt, take the day off. And that's a good rule of thumb. In general, if you're feeling like I'm not sure that I can handle running today, that's probably for a good reason. But you should spend a little more time diagnosing it than just, I'm just going to take the day off.
I actually... I don't mind that they said that because I feel like that's conservative, but I don't actually agree with that one either, because there's many times that I don't feel great for one reason or another. Like I might feel like I'm overly fatigued, but then I start jogging and I'm energized, and it helps get me out of my funk, because it's very hard to determine sometimes if what you're feeling is a physical fatigue or just a general fatigue, and maybe you just need the blood to move around, and if you jog slow enough, it could be beneficial regardless of that fatigue feeling. So I don't know. I think when in doubt, walk out the door, start having a walk, maybe get a little, start jogging.
So what you're saying is rule number 2 takes precedence over rule number 4.
Yeah, something is better than nothing.
Something is better than nothing. And if you get to the point where any amount of something is a major concern for you, then maybe take the day off.
Right. And maybe they're saying like an injury thing. When in doubt, take the day off, which then I would agree.
The problem with short phrase rules and sound bites like this is that there are never enough information to really truly make decisions.
Yeah. I've even had, not that I need to talk more about this, but I've even had times where I felt bad before a race. And like, I'm just jogging around. I'm like, okay, I'll kind of warm up, see how it goes, and then end up running a PR.
Yeah.
And if I would have been in doubt about that and decided not to run, then I would have missed out on an opportunity to see a PR.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
That's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so outside of the rules, they also included a bunch of training tips, and it was kind of the stuff that, ignore statistics.
Hey.
Which is really fascinating for
surprising.
Runner's World to say that.
Well, they have different writers.
They do. It's true. It's not like Runner's World is not one person and all of their thoughts. Ignore statistics. Pace yourself, which is kind of counterintuitive to the ignore statistics one, except for that they're really just mean don't go too hard.
Mm-hmm.
But they use the word pace, and that throws people off. Or maybe it just throws me off. Throws me into a tizzy. Shoes. Shoes are important, and wear good shoes. And then aches versus injuries, which I think that's actually a really good thing to start teaching runners at the very beginning. Is that not all of the I feel not great right now, not all of those things are major concerns. And then hydration, great, and some other stuff like that. So general training tips, not a lot of complaints there. It's all just straightforward stuff that's good for anyone to have. And I think if you're a brand new runner and you have never done this thing and you haven't spent a lot of time around other runners, some of this is going to be totally novel to you. And it's probably very important to have a basic list of here are some good things that are going to help you do this thing well.
Mm-hmm.
I like it. And then as noted, they did have racing tips for the event, which at the very least, the comment Andy was saying about this big event and I have no idea what to expect. They do talk about planning ahead, look into the details of the event before you show up, expect to need time before the event. Don't just show up at start time. You need more time to get ready or to get the stuff or to go to the places. So all of that. And then even the race execution itself, chunk it, break it into sections in your head. If it's a 5K, it's obviously 3 miles-ish. And so break it into 3 sections or something like that. Start easy so that you can be manageable. Mm-hmm. Good tips. Okay. So overall, not bad. Feeling pretty good about the Runner's World information.
Yeah.
We'll come back to an overall reaction with all of this here in just a moment. But let's move on to the next one, because actually I just found this to be hilarious. The second thing listed, and remember how we talked about how Google vets the stuff that shows up? Or they do vet the stuff, or they're taking a big paycheck from Reddit. Because Reddit always shows up on the first page, no matter what you search. Because I guarantee you, Reddit is paying Google tons of money.
That's so weird.
There's no way Reddit shows up on the first page of every Google search for basically any topic under the sun, unless there's some kind of under-the-table thing going on. Because Reddit's information is literally the opposite of credible information. It's just a discussion forum.
Yeah.
And it can be valuable, but it's just a discussion forum.
Maybe they know that a lot of people just want to be heard. They don't even, they're searching stuff just to have a conversation with strangers.
Well, listen,
online.
I got to tell you, I am often more inclined to look at the Reddit posts in response to my questions about things than posted articles, because posted articles tend to be this kind of contrived package of things. And on Reddit, someone just posts a question and then a whole bunch of random people just say what they think might help them. And a lot of times there's really good stuff in there, especially how-to questions around things like technical information, like computer programming.
Okay, well.
Yeah. Okay, well.
So you actually use it, so now
I do.
You just made a case for Reddit.
Not always for these kinds of things. But the problem is you can't go to Reddit for a source of information if you know nothing about the topic, because you have no idea whether people are giving you good information or not. Reddit's a good place to go if you have a good foundation on the topic and you're looking for technical, specific things that might be necessary. Anyway, that's just one perception in a moment about Reddit. I'm sure there's lots of other thoughts there. So as a source on the Couch to 5K, the Reddit question was really just focused on apps. And so I don't know why it showed up as the best Couch to 5K training, but everyone is just posting about all their favorite Couch to 5K apps. And there's a lot of them out there. Most of them are not free. Most of them play music while you run and then tell you when to stop running and start walking. And so you just listen to the workout for the day while you're running and just do everything it says, which I think is terrible because it means you're not making any decisions. And so as a runner, while that might get you to the end of this Couch to 5K program, it is not helping you grow any capacity yourself in some of those key areas. So I think it's maybe you use it once in a while potentially, but like at the very beginning perhaps. I understand
Which is
though.
what this is all about.
Well, no, I
Couch to
mean
5K.
like the first couple runs. But,
I see.
But my point being, I understand why though, because if you're doing something like a minute on, minute off, you don't want to have to be like looking at your watch constantly to know when to start and stop. So you set an interval timer that just does a beep at you on the watch, and let that be enough. And don't try to mess with these app things. Anyway, okay, so that was Reddit. All people looking for free apps. The next one was a service that is oriented toward beginner runners in particular called None to Run. And they claim to be a better alternative to Couch to 5K for people who are starting running for the very first time. Explain why in a moment. But this article that popped up in response to our query was a different kind of approach to the topic, which I thought was interesting. And so immediately something that stood out to me, because as Andy said earlier, it makes me feel like this is the most negative thing. And you always gravitate toward the most negative thing because the thing that creates fear or anger is the thing we most want to consume, even if it's not conscious. And so their title here is 3 Flaws in Couch to 5K.
Which you're going to click on, right? Because if you're going to look for a Couch to 5K, you want to see what the flaws are, right?
What's wrong with Couch to 5K?
Exactly.
Yes, I think it was genius.
Genius.
This guy, Mike, whatever his name is, he knows what he's doing. All right, so here's his 3 flaws. There's no strength and mobility component, which is true.
True.
Yeah, that's
He's
true.
not wrong.
It focuses on distance instead of time. Oh,
Ooh,
interesting.
hey. You might like that, huh?
And it progresses too quickly.
Maybe not.
It depends on the person. But his response is that many runners have told him, I tried Couch to 5K, but it started me running too much too soon. I couldn't handle it, and then it got discouraging. And my first thought is, there's a chance that you're just trying to run at too high of an effort.
Yeah.
Maybe the running is exertionally it's not clear how much effort you should be giving, and maybe
or you
that's
need to walk more when you're starting.
Well, and that's what he says.
To get the time.
Yeah, that's what he says.
Mm-hmm.
So the running intervals and the walking intervals are different in his None to Run training plan. So I gave him my email and downloaded his plan because I actually wanted to see it, and you could get his for free as opposed to Runner's World.
Wow.
And so he has my email now, and I'm sure he's going to do all sorts of things with it, like market his products to me. But basically, it is exactly as articulated. It's a more gradual approach. You do 3 days a week, which is the classic Couch to 5K. You do a certain amount of running, a certain amount of walking. He starts you very easy. But because he's starting you so much more gradually, his plan is also a little bit longer, which is another thing I appreciate. Because as you've heard us say many times, 8 to 10 weeks for a training plan for anything is not a lot of time to acquire much by way of adaptations. And so you're not really giving yourself much benefit to the work you're doing if you only do it for 8 weeks.
I mean, you're getting benefit, but it's better if you do it longer.
Well, keep in mind, physiologically speaking, it takes 10 to 14 days for just about anything you do to then turn into an adaptation, like fully become an adaptation, meaning an asset to you physiologically. And if that's the case, 10 to 14 days, that means that if you're only doing things for 8 weeks, that you're only really getting 6 weeks worth of benefit from the thing you're doing. And as everyone listening to this knows, when you're trying to do something like running for a distance, like for a longer distance than, a sprint, you need time to work on the systems and develop the adaptations. And 6 weeks, I think, is discouraging for most runners to say you're going to train for 8 weeks and then you're going to be able to do this 5K. And it's like, yeah, but it was really hard. Well, yeah, because you didn't give it enough time. You needed more adaptation.
If Lydiard were to have a downloadable, he would have a 2-year beginner runner plan. He would.
No, he wouldn't.
Yes, he would.
You're just trying to be goofy.
No, it's true. Remember he said that he would just love to just keep people in conditioning for...
His point was you should condition between Olympic Games and not worry about anything else.
I'm just saying, I think he would just have like some really long thing.
Yeah, no. He was kind of being eccentric on purpose. All right. So the one thing about the None to Run article is that it didn't give you a lot of information. It gave you their training plan and gave you a few rationales. justification for their plan. But as opposed to the Runner's World article, which gave you just a ton about like, here's all your new runner stuff, this article was very precise. And I'm sure there are many more articles on their website for new runner stuff, but it was not a one-stop shop experience. Last thing, we stumbled upon an article because it was one of the top suggestions that was from a Peace Corps blog. Now, I found this to be really fascinating. The Wandering the World blog is essentially a blog about just random stuff for those who are doing Peace Corps experiences. And so that was kind of cool. So then they talked about the Couch to 5K program from the perspective of if you're doing this in some foreign land where you're living temporarily. And it was quite informational and educational. It was definitely written more from like the perspective of, I want to help you know more about this thing, which is not always the case from the product pushers. They tend to be like, I want you to do my thing. And this one was just more like, I want you to know more about this thing. And I thought that was refreshing. And so some of the differences here included, this article had hurdles to overcome. Like you're out of shape at the beginning. And so, expect that and ease into it. But then also mentioned doing strength work as a way to help build capacity for the running itself, which is of course true, and that's wonderful. Shoes, again, were included, except for then the author went on to say, and the shoes that I have found to be the best are actually sandals. Literally, the author's running in sandals.
I've seen people do it.
I have too. I think it's a terrible idea, but this is a different kind of perspective.
There's a lot more ultra people who do the sandal thing. I'd have to look into that, but.
Yep. Okay. Put your watch away and just try to finish. Wonderful. Love it.
Woo.
Clearly someone coming
Good
from
job. Way to go.
From the other side of the aisle here. Some other Peace Corps specifics like don't run without some kind of stick or rock in your hand because of, deadly wild animals. And make sure you tell the people you're with that you're running and where you're going. It's and important. Bring your phone because, lots of unsafe things. And so that I read through it and I was like, whoa, this does not make me want to join the Peace Corps, but it is very important to include in this article. And then the last thing I wanted to mention, which is just, again, this clearly is someone writing from a different perspective, but one of his biggest suggestions in the article was get support and accountability. Like, don't just do this alone. Find friends to do it with you or people that you can talk to about it. And it will just be, well, he actually says it'll make it better, but you'll enjoy it more as well. I thought, just how good. So true. Good. Okay. Well, that's about it as far as the top things we found when we searched Couch to 5K. Mm-hmm. So what do we think about that? What's missing? What's good?
I thought overall there were some good nuggets. I liked that last article that it set expectations and it identified challenges because we're always going to do better overcoming hurdles if we know that they're there and we're not blindsided by them. That's when we fall. That's when we stumble. That's when we want to feel like we're going to give up. So I think it's important to set expectations and to know what it's going to be like. I think that also is informative in planning, of course, as well.
Yeah. Well, okay. So the one biggest thing, if I were to say one major criticism that I didn't see anywhere in any of the stuff is no one was trying to help the person who's doing this understand what they're doing when they're training. Like what's happening to you when you're training and how are you going to make that happen the best way possible. They gave you some of the tips to that end, but they didn't tell you why those tips connect to that ultimate physiological telos. Like what are you trying to accomplish by this running thing? And then knowing that, what are the things you can do, mindsets, physiological adaptations, life experience as far as what else is going on in your life to help achieve that at the highest possible level. So, so you feel good, so you enjoy it, those types of things. We're not trying to say that someone searching Couch to 5K is like the most disciplined runner on the planet and wants to know everything about the sport. And that's not their motivation here, but where can we put that degree of understanding such that it works for the beginner runner to help them down this path in a better way?
Yeah.
That's my thinking.
So not only, because it kind of goes with what I said, setting the expectations, but also knowing the purpose. Yep. Those are very important things for any runner, but for those who are just beginning, they will be new ideas, most likely.
Right on. All right, so that's the first of our A to Z running versus the search engine, and I think it went pretty well.
Yeah.
Not a lot of, we weren't being super negative, and we had a couple additions, but not a lot. However, I have a feeling that some of these other topics we've got in store for you are going to yield a little more contention.
They may.
They may. But I also want to open it up to you, our listeners. If you have a topic that you would like us to tackle, to search it in the search engine and then react, share that with us. We have a few in mind, certainly, but we're happy to make a change or add another if you come up with one and want to share it with us. So do that if you want on the places where you interact with us. Or you can always just send us an email, info@AtoZRunning.com, or go to our website and you'll find a way to communicate with us there. So we're looking forward to it. This is going to be fun. We hope that you find it practical as well.
Yeah.
Now, let's move on to the latest news and updates from the world of running. Starting the world of running with some A to Z runner updates, we want to share Elijah ran a PR and second overall at the Freaky Fives 5-mile race.
That sounds fun. 5-mile races aren't hard to come by, I would imagine.
As Jed once said, there is nothing better than racing 5 miles.
Really? Okay. I don't know if I've ever done that, actually.
Well, 8K. It's basically
I don't know
5 miles.
but I think I ran the Shamrock Shuffle one year.
Yeah.
That's it.
That's basically the only 8K out there.
Yeah.
As far as I know.
In the Marine Corps Marathon, we had Trinity and Carrie.
Really good stuff.
Congratulations, ladies.
Congrats on completing that one. Paul ran as well the USATF Wisconsin Cross Country Championships and finished 4th overall, just outside the podium.
Fantastic running, though. That's
running.
a tough course there in Wisconsin too.
Kenosha.
We've run on it.
Love it. Doesn't get much
Difficult
better as far as cross country goes. All right. Let's talk about Valencia.
Let's talk about Valencia. Every year we talk about Valencia.
Not just once a year. They've got like 4 races there, and they do them at different times. So they've got a half, they've got a full, they've got a 10K, and they're all very, very, very fast. Or maybe it's a 10-mile. I can't ever remember. So it's not unsurprising when people run fast in Valencia. But sometimes exactly how fast and who does it is surprising. So let's talk about Yamif Kejelcha of Ethiopia. Notably, a serious track star since his teenage years. He has multiple records, including one world indoor record. The world indoor mile record is Yamif Kejelcha. And yet also is great on the roads. He's just like a threat of all calibers. And so Kejelcha narrowly edged out Jacob Kiplimo's world half marathon record by running a 1-second improvement in 57 minutes and 30 seconds.
Wow.
In the rain.
Wow.
Yeah.
I find it very difficult to race in the rain.
Yeah. A lot of people do. Kejelcha was a breakaway effort in this one, so he didn't have a ton of company at that speed, but he did lead 6 men under 59 minutes.
Ooh.
He had 5 other guys in the 58-minute range, and so it was quick, and it was deep, as it often is. But interestingly enough, he ended up more or less by himself by the end of the race, which is pretty impressive work.
I think first American was Morgan
Pearson. Yep.
and he ran 101. We don't write it down.
61 and change.
I saw it on social media.
The triathlete.
Yeah. That's impressive time.
Yeah, I mean, he's a fast runner.
Yeah, obviously.
They always say, Morgan Pearson, the triathlete. Yeah, but he also is a very fast runner. So he's not just a triathlete. All right. But on the women's side, things were a little bit more surprising. And so first, the half marathon world record for the women did not get broken. It was only missed by 11 seconds. But the individual to do so, leading an incredible top 4 finishers, which we'll get to in a moment, was Kenya's Agnes Ngetich, which you'll recall the name if you've been paying attention to us, because we've talked about her. Back in January of this year, she ran an absurd 10K, which...
Absurd.
I'm trying to remember where it was. Was it in Valencia? I don't know. Anyway.
It was I don't know.
she ran a 10K in 28 minutes and 40 some odd seconds to break the world record by a landslide, a huge margin. And then not only did she break the 10K world record, which is on the roads, of course, she also broke the 5K world record en route to the 10K world record by a substantial amount. And because they had a specific timing location for it, it's official. And so she got both the 10K and 5K world records in that one effort. This half marathon now, where she missed the world record by 11 seconds, is her debut. It's her first ever half marathon. It is the number 2 performance of all time. And apparently she was injured only a handful of months ago. And so we'll come back to that. But in second place, not in second place, but with her for a fair chunk of the race was Ethiopia's Ejgaye Hutaye, who is most
Always
notably a track star, but she's also been phenomenal on the roads. She was the former 5K world record holder on the roads. That Ngetich broke in that 10K race. Taye went with her for more than the first half, and they were cooking. They went through 10K in 29:18.
Ouch.
Which, by the way, only 3 women have ever run a 10K faster than that.
Wow.
And they're on their way to a half marathon. So they slowed down after that. They did not hold pace. Taye especially struggled in the second half, which no surprise because she was running her 10K PR at the time.
She is such a fierce competitor.
She is.
Like, she'll do whatever it takes to be in the mix.
And she did just that.
Even if she has to crash and burn.
Yep. So Ngetich slowed just less than Taye and ended up winning the race in 1:03:04.
Whoa.
As mentioned, number 2 all time. But then second, not that far behind, was Fotien Tesfaye of Ethiopia in 1:03:21, which is the number 3 time all time. Third was Lillian Rangaruk of Kenya in 1:03:32, another 11 seconds back, number 4 performance all time. And then Taye faded to 4th in 1:04:14, which actually is also her debut.
I didn't realize Taye hasn't done
not a half, nope. But that's still a top 10 all-time performance. So the top 4 ran top 10 performances. The first 3 across the line were 2nd, 3rd, and 4th all-time. So it was obviously a fast day.
Yeah.
Obviously a fast venue. And yet, immediately, the suspicions rise. And so this is where people they're going to be frustrated with us for saying this because they're like, every time a Kenyan runs fast, you're suspicious. Well, sometimes. But
the reason is not because of the individuals. It's because of the governing.
Well, kind of both. It depends on the situation. Ngetich's situation is both. So keep in mind, I mentioned that crazy 10K last year, right? The question becomes, well, what was she doing before that 10K? That was super amazing. And the answer is nothing. She was not super amazing before that 10K. She was actually the opposite of super amazing. She was mostly just regular as far as world-class runners go. Not any faster than the rest of the pack in anything she was doing for years. And then at the end of 2023, she ran, I can't remember if it was a 5K or a 10K, at the very end of 2023 that was super fast, like minutes faster than she had run before. And then 2 months later broke the world record in the 10K. And that is one reason for suspicion in an athlete. Sudden, immense improvement in performances that seems entirely out of the blue, which is why people thought Tigist Sefa last year when she broke the world record seemed a little suspicious because it was a massive performance improvement seemingly out of nowhere. So fast forward now. That raised a lot of suspicions when Ngetich did that last year. Fast forward now, and come to find out, she was injured at most 4 months ago before this half marathon in a state of poor health running-wise, and then somehow is basically the fastest half marathoner of all time. Once again, begs questions. Now, that's not the only reason why people get suspicious in this situation, because she also runs for a federation that is currently the most violating doping federation in the world. That is the nation of Kenya. And that is not speculation. That's literal truth. So let's talk about this very briefly because, and I should mention, Let's Run has been reporting on this, and that's where a lot of this information has come from as far as Ngetich's specific situation. Okay, so we've been talking about Chepngetich. Ruth Chepngetich broke the world record in the marathon in Chicago, and it was crazy, crazy fast, even like leaps and bounds ahead of Asefa's world record. Now, a lot of people have been frustrated with the immediate speculation about Chepngetich's legitimacy there. And a lot of people would be frustrated by us saying something like Ngetich maybe is concerning. But here's the reality of the situation that you must understand. Kenya in particular raises red flags when their athletes do this, and here's why. There are currently just over 600 athletes in the sport of athletics, which is track and field, who are serving suspensions on the World Anti-Doping List, which is the Athletics Integrity Unit, the AIU. And so just over 600 in the world currently serving suspensions. Over 100 of them are Kenyan. We're talking about more than 17% of the currently suspended athletes in the world for doping belong to one country. And by the way, there's actually one other country that has almost as many. Any guesses? It's not Russia. India.
Oh.
And that is well known. In India, running culture is well known to be rampant cheating. But they also don't have the infrastructure so it's not exposed as much as it is other places. Between Kenya and India, they account for more than 1/3 of all current suspensions in the world for doping. And Kenya is a very small percentage of the total athletes in the world who are competing and participating. More still, Kenya only really has athletes competing in a handful of events at a world-class level. They don't have throwers at the world-class level. They have like one or two here and there. They don't have sprinters at the world-class level. Again, they do have one or two here and there. But they're really just distance runners. And they are serving more than 17% of the current doping suspensions. And so when a Kenyan runner runs absurdly fast compared to that own runner's history and relative to other athletes in the sport or on the day, people are suspicious. And they should be because of the situation, such as it is.
I don't know that the organization, the Kenyan Athletics, when they wrote the note, it pretty much was shaming people for being suspicious.
Yeah.
But what I was thinking was this. Really you should be apologizing to Ruth Chepngetich because they were the ones who caused the shadow. The suspicion is warranted based on Kenyan Athletics, not on Ruth Chepngetich as a person. So I feel like their response of shaming rather than owning what is going on within their federation is also very telling. Because like I said, it is just so sad because if Ruth Chepngetich is clean, and we can all hope that it's their incompetency that's causing this shadow.
Mm-hmm. So further addressing the issue, Alex Hutchinson, writing for Run by Outside, shared additional thoughts on the topic and some additional research, which was helpful, including the reality that Kenya was faced with a choice in 2016 Olympics. They were told, you're either banned as a nation or you need to do X, Y, and Z to take care of this problem. And that included the founding of, because up until that time in 2016, they did not have internally an organization that was actually testing their athletes and monitoring their athletes. And so they had to start one. Immediately became apparent globally that organization was quite corrupt, where officials were doing all sorts of shenanigans, lots of different things. More to the point, though, it also was immediately incapable of serving its prime directive, which is to say, while they were an organization intended to hold athletes accountable, they were terrible about testing athletes. They were never testing athletes regularly. They'd go through long stretches of time where they wouldn't test a certain athlete at all, and yet that person was like a top-tier global athlete. And there's lots of different things like that going on for years. And once again, approaching 2024 Olympics, actually maybe it was the 2021, now that I'm thinking about it, Kenya was once again in a situation where they were on the verge of being banned as a nation because they are violating so many doping rules, their athletes. And once again, did the very barely got through the threshold of here's what you need to do to not be banned. And then what we're facing right now is just announced, like this is in the last week or two, Kenya announced, we've shared it on the podcast, that they have cut 90% of the budget to their anti-doping organization internally, because they didn't have the money. They don't have the money to fund the thing, and the thing isn't doing the thing anyway. And by the way, the first question you always have to ask when you say, how is this organization? They weren't even able to pay for their internet bill at their main office, right?
That's sad, though.
Well, no, you ask the first question, where'd the money go? Because they were given money. Where'd it go?
They were given money to have this internal organization. Gotcha.
Remember, highly corrupt. So chances are that money's going into people's pockets, not into the stuff that needs to happen. And so you can look at all of this and you can say, one, it's very unfortunate for the athletes because, of course, not everyone in Kenya is doping. But also, the amount of people who are doping in Kenya tells you that there is a systematic problem and it needs to be addressed, because you've got young Kenyan athletes who are basically being told, if you don't dope, you're never going to cut it. You're not going to be good enough. So you have to, because everyone else is. And if you can't put that to death, then you're not going to solve the problem. And that's where they're at right now. Kenya is liable to face another ban by the time the next Olympics comes around. And because of their current situation with their anti-doping organization, chances are they're not going to be able to fend the next one off if they can't do something differently. So we'll see. We'll see. But it's very tragic. It's very sad. And it is the kind of thing where you say, we don't really want to be skeptical of people every time.
We want to celebrate. It's way more fun to just celebrate the world records and yeah.
And I think Hutchinson, by the way, kind of concluded his article with a really great commentary around the point of like suspicion and how there has to be a threshold, right? You can't be suspicious of everyone every time they do something great, and you can't be suspicious of no one because someone's cheating at some point. And so you have to have some kind of threshold. And he kind of laid it out, and he's like, the things that tend to stand out to us are things like what kinds of shenanigans are going around the individual. And so if you're running on a team where 4 out of 5 runners have been banned for doping, we're going to be suspicious of you too. We're going to be. There's no hope about it. Also, if you have done something that doesn't line up with what we expect is likely for someone physiologically, and there's good reason to say things like this. Like Ruth Chepngetich, at 30 years of age, has had a long career of demonstrating her trajectory and her capacity.
Which is high. Which
is great. She's world class. She's one of the best all time. But to have a 5-minute personal best performance, 4 and 40 seconds, or 4 and 10, 20 seconds or something, to have over 4-minute personal best performance at age 30, when her trajectory was somewhat linear before that, is almost impossible.
And a lot of you guys are going to be listening to Zach say that, and you're going to be like, well, I got a 4-minute PR when I was 30. But this is actually very different because she's already been training at such a high caliber. Plus, the faster you get, the more those increments mean.
Yes.
So there wasn't lots of time to lollop? No, that's not the word.
I don't know what you're trying to say. But
lop off.
Yeah, I gotcha. Yeah. So again, when we talk about these topics, we are not trying to levy criticism simply because we don't think somebody should be able to do that thing, or we don't think that person's deserving of that accolade. That's never been the case for the running world in general. Certainly there are people on the message boards that are saying all sorts of horrible things because there are horrible people, and you give them a message board, they'll say they're horrible things. But in general, the running world is actually quite forgiving and more like trusting. And in that we want to believe in our athletes. And what we'd like to see is the kind of thing that holds athletes accountable to the degree that we don't have to be suspicious. There's always a threshold of suspicion, as Hutchinson said. But the Kenyan athletes right now are beyond the threshold of suspicion when they have these kinds of crazy performances because of the situation, such as it is. Very unfortunate.
Some of my favorite athletes are...
Yep.
representing Kenya.
Yeah, and there has to be a background what if with all of those, and it's tragic. We don't like it, and we want it to improve. Mm-hmm. All right, so that's the situation. We're not planning on spending a lot more time talking about it, but we felt like it was valuable to bring more of the general context and history behind it here. Mm-hmm. So one last thing, because it's just crazy. And like Andy said last week, we want to end positively as much as possible. And this is, if not positive, at least humorous. A man ran the Chicago Marathon in high heels, like stilettos.
Ouch.
Not quite stilettos, but close to stilettos.
I would not want to do that. I just can't even imagine. I've had to wear heels a lot in my life, and I just cannot imagine trying to run a marathon in heels.
Well, he did it because there's a world record for it, and he wanted to break it. Do you have any idea what that world record might be?
I have
Take a guess.
no
Take
idea.
a stab in the dark. How fast did someone run a marathon in high heels?
7 hours. I don't know.
Whew. 5 hours and 13 minutes.
Okay.
Which I think is crazy. I'm also not sure why. I like. Did this guy practice? Did he spend a lot of time in high heels before this? Because you have to, right? Otherwise, you're going to ruin yourself.
Also, there is a huge difference with heels that you've broken in and heels that you haven't. So if he's broken them in, then he's much more likely to have a better experience.
Check it out. One of his strategies, he was carrying a backup pair with him. He had 2 pair of high heels with him. Because, of course,
Did you use both?
Well, you have to assume. There's no way those things can endure for hours and hours. I don't know. But he also had his feet like wrapped in a very specific way. They showed a picture, and like he had like some tape and pre-wrap wrapped around his feet, clearly to try to protect his feet. Like these are the kinds of heels that they don't have straps, they don't have buckles or anything.
Yeah.
They're just the classic pointed toe.
They do cut in the back of your
plastic,
heel, though. No matter what, like heels tend to cut around your foot where your foot opening is until you've broken them in.
So he went for it. He was trying to run that 5-hour 13 world record. His whole thing was raising awareness about women and children in domestic abuse situations, which, okay, so great. He's got a good cause. His theme, which I found to be a little bit funny, quite clever, walk a mile in my shoes was the theme. Because he's like, walk a mile in my shoes. How about I run a marathon in your shoes? Literally. Except women don't run marathons in high heels. So
many of us choose not to wear heels most of the time.
Or even wear them at all a lot of the time.
It's the idea.
It's the idea, yes. It was clever. Okay. I have to say, side note, if I were to speculate about what person in general is the most likely to break the world record, male or female, break the world record in high heels, I think a woman's probably going to.
Oh yeah,
particularly one who wears high heels regularly.
It makes a difference. It really does. And I can tell you, even though it doesn't put my body in a great position, by the end of my season of work when I was traveling doing presentations for Toyota, at the end I would be much better. Like my feet felt better in the heels than at the very beginning. Yeah. Beginning of the season would always be torturous.
Can't imagine. And I never will have to because I'm not going to try to wear high heels for a marathon. But he didn't get it, by the way.
Oh, he didn't?
No. It clearly was harder than he would have expected. I bet his feet
were just barking.
I didn't see an after picture, probably because it would be so brutal that you'd have to like put it behind a rating wall or something. He ran 7:05. Instead of the 5:13.
Well, I guess didn't I guess 7 hours?
You did, which I think is more likely the case than the current record. But
I just want to say this because of my experience and as I imagine how horrible this would be. One of the things that makes it so tough to be in heels for hours is that your feet do end up swelling, and so the way that your feet are when you start, it slips. So you need to have a good fit of your heel. Otherwise, your heel is slipping out and you have to like hold it and like grip it with your feet. So either your feet are overworking or they're being pinched and cut. So there's really not a good choice there's not a really.
Maybe that's why he had 2 pairs.
Yeah, maybe he did. Maybe
he had a bigger pair
I bet he
for
did.
the second half of the race.
I bet he did.
Oh, that would be even more clever.
I bet.
I don't think so, but
that's what I would do though. Now that I'm like
because you're smart about heels, you've spent time having to figure this out. Anyway, it didn't happen this time, but he at least had a clever go of it, and
it'd be interesting to know what his like actual marathon time is when he is running with
maybe that's
normal
the only
shoes.
Marathon he's ever done.
So maybe
I'm joking. I have no idea.
Next time he'll have an improvement.
You would hope, because that couldn't have felt good. But
he probably never wants to do it again. He probably never wants to your pair feels again in his life.
Well, as promised, we were going to end the episode with something a little more upbeat, and that was at least a fun little story.
And we're talking about it, so all of his efforts did bring awareness.
That was the point. Bring
for women
awareness.
and children and domestic abuse.
That's right.
Well, everyone, thank you so much for joining us. We look forward to sharing more search engine results about running with all of you and our thoughts on it. Talk to you next week.